Welcome to Brothers in Media, the bros who know, with Scott and Craig Colby. The lying media, oh, they lie so much. They love to lie so much. What does that mean? Does the media actually lie to you? Well, the bros who know answer that question for you, and we're happy to do that for you right now. And who are the bros who know? Well, let me tell you, the fabulously handsome person to my right, is Scott Colby. That's right. Scott Colby. He has spent as a journalist with 36 years of experience. His 36 years of experience in print media. He's experienced as a reporter, columnist, editor, photographer, and designer, as well as a national best-selling author and the creator of the Coach Colby Writing Academy. Visit his website, coachcolby.me, for a free insider's cheat sheet on how to write effective op-eds.
And the man in the blue shirt with the deep blue eyes over there, that's my brother Craig, who has spent 37 years in broadcasting. He's an award-winning executive producer, an author, and owner of Colby Vision, a video production and consulting company.
That's right. And we are going to talk about lying in the media. So does the media actually lie to you? That's the question. We hear it all the time out there. We're going to cover a lot of ground, so strap in. There's a lot of aspects to it. But I think the first thing we have to talk about is, what do we mean by the media? The media can mean a lot of things. I think when this is discussed, mostly people talk about it as the news media. So we are going to talk about the news media first. And the way we're going to structure it, we're going to talk about the news media. We're going to talk about some famous cases in lying in the media. And then we're going to talk about other broadcast elements news media elements where I have more experience. And Scott and I are going to trade some stories. We're going to ask each other if we think those are lies. So I believe Scott has a story that he wants to start with.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lying, and then there's maybe withholding information, right? So I'm going to tell a story that, well, we can determine. I don't know if anyone's listening to us right now and they want to join in the chat, what they think. But I can say that, so I've worked in 7 newsrooms in Ontario, big and small. And I don't know of anyone, we'll get to this later, ever blatantly lying. But sometimes there is withholding information. So when I was a young reporter working for the Kingston Whig Standard, it was a week before Christmas. It was my first week in Kingston working for the paper there, the Whig Standard. And it was a Sunday. And I was sent out because a boy had been walking with his father along the railroad tracks and was hit by a train and tragically died. So my job as a reporter was to do what's called a pickup, which means you go to the home of the family and you try and get a story and at least get a photo of the person who died. Nowadays, we rely on social media to get pictures. But back then, this was in 1991, you had to go knock on the door. So I hated this assignment. I absolutely hated it. But anyway, I had to do it. So I found the address, and I went to the home, and I knocked on the door, and a man came to the door, and I told the man who I was and why I was there. Scott Colby from the Whig Standard. I'm sorry to bother you, but someone in this house died yesterday on the train tracks, and I'm wondering if you wanted to talk about it. And the man said, that was my son, and no, I don't want to talk. So I went, whew, thank God. And I remember walking back. I remember walking up the steps and walking back. I remember counting the cracks in the sidewalk, thinking, this is just horrible. Anyway, as I walked down the sidewalk, and this was in a poor part of Kingston. Kingston doesn't have many really wealthy areas, but this was a poorer side of Kingston and a poorer part of town. And when I reached the sidewalk, the man said, wait a minute, I want to tell you something. And he ran out. It's just for Christmas. There's snow on the ground. It's cold. And he said, we were walking along along the tracks, and we saw a train coming. And I went on one side of the tracks, and my son jumped on the other. The son, I think, was something like 8 or 9 years old, and he said he made it, but the force of the train, the suction, it must have brought him back in, and he hit the train and he died. Right. So I took it all down. I think I asked him a few more questions, and I went back to the office with my story and I wrote it up, and it appeared on the front page of the paper the next day. So this was like my first week in the paper, and I got a front page story, very tragic front page story. So what people need to know about Kingston is that it has, at the time, it had a lot of prisons. There's still some prisons there, but there was I think 6 prisons, including the prison for women, so 7 prisons. And I wasn't aware of the prison culture in Kingston. And what the man told me was he was serving time, and he was out on the weekend, and that's when he was visiting his son. And I didn't put that information in the paper. I withheld the fact that he was an inmate who was visiting his son on the weekend, because I thought he's going to get savaged enough as it is in the court of public opinion for walking along the tracks with his son in a dangerous spot. You know, the article, I also interviewed the police who say this is a dangerous spot. This isn't the first accident. People shouldn't go there. So I thought I was doing this guy a favor by not reporting that he was an inmate out on, and I was the only reporter there. No one else. I mean, there's a weekly newspaper, there's a radio station, there's a TV station. This was information that no one else had. So, you know, what is that lying? Was I wrong to withhold that information? In retrospect, like, I always regretted that decision. I should have given all the information, because in Kingston, I think people would understand that there's so many people in Kingston, the Kingston community, who have family who are incarcerated or whatever. So that's my personal story of, I'd say, withholding information. Is it a lie? I don't think so. Was I given the full story? Was the story as impactful as it could have been? I would say no. I should have included the information. But you know, that's just kind of my version. What do you think of that, Craig?
I understand why you withheld it. I think it's a very human thing to do. The person has suffered enough. I don't know what it adds to the story. I don't know that it materially changes anything that anybody thinks about what happened in any sort of positive way. It doesn't change the fact that they're walking on the train tracks. It doesn't change what happened. I personally don't know what that adds to the story. Is it lying? No. I think that is a gatekeeping decision, the kind of thing that happens all the time.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to give you a personal story of mine from, I've been in 3 newsrooms. I've been in a radio newsroom where I started my career. I was in the TSN sports desk, now Sports Center newsroom, so a sports newsroom, for 5 years. And I was at Discovery Canada, later Daily Planet, a daily science news show newsroom. Not exactly the same as the full newsrooms, but they work the same. And I have only seen an attempt at misdirection. I wouldn't even call it that. I'm not going to mention the reporter's name. I was out producing a story with a reporter. It was with the Argonauts when they signed Raghib Ismail, which is a big signing. He was a Heisman Trophy winner. He was going to make his first appearance in a preseason game. But he got injured, so he wasn't going to play. So we went down beforehand, and our reporter decided that the start of the item should have people saying, "I'm here to see Rocket. I'm here to see Raghib." And the question was, what are you here for tonight? Of course, the Argo fans knew that Raghib wasn't playing. So there was some persistence from the reporter in asking that question. Eventually, I said, I know you want to start the story that way. We can't, because it's not the story. We can't plant things inside people's mouths. So we got to do the story. We have to find a new way to start it. We didn't end up lying on that, right? But that's the closest I've seen in a newsroom to lying. I have seen nothing but people trying to get it right. Of course, mistakes happen, but trying to get it right all the time. Any thoughts on that one, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, again, you got to be honest with what is happening in real time. You can't manipulate it. So that's a deception. Is it a lie? You got it on video. It's actually happening.
Yeah, but we didn't use that. So let's talk about some extremely famous lies that have happened in the news media, because when it does really happen, there are consequences.
Mm-hmm.
There's a gentleman named Klaus Relodius who wrote for Der Spiegel, which is a very famous publication. He was caught inventing things for stories. It was a big stink everywhere, and he lost his job for it. What I think is important here, from my perspective anyway, is how he was caught. He was caught by another reporter for Der Spiegel because his stories were so good. There were so incredible things happen. When you write stories that are factual, you wish things happened a certain way because they make it a better story. And it looks like Klaus just made up the stuff that would make it a better, more sensational, more engaging story. So another reporter investigated him, and Der Spiegel reported it. And that they put themselves at shame for that. Any thoughts on that one, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, that's just wrong on so many levels. The good thing is that his own publication, didn't look the other way, right? Someone had their spidey senses were tingling and they investigated. And that's also what happened with the Jason Blair story in the New York Times.
Let's talk about the Jason Blair story in the New York Times, because this one, it's about 20 years ago.
It was 2003. Yeah, it was 22 years ago. Do
you want to talk about that one?
Well, it just here's a young reporter who was writing all these stories, and they were fantastic stories with great quotes and everything. And in a nutshell, he made it up, a lot of it, and he said he was places he wasn't. The New York Times, the editors started getting concerned about his stories because there was a lot of errors in them, and he was very good at covering his tracks, but he also made a lot of mistakes. And then they started looking into it and discovered that he couldn't have been somewhere where he said he was because they checked his travel records. And there's a freelance photographer. I think he was up in Buffalo or something, and they were supposed to go to some church, and the freelancer never saw him there, and he had all these quotes and everything. So things are kind of built up. But again, it was the New York Times, and that one, a lot of people lost their jobs, high-ranking Times officials, and it damaged the reputation of the Times for the Times for quite a while. So I mean, that is that example, the Jason Blair story, because it's the New York Times, the most austere, august publication in North America, perhaps the world, and it was a real black mark. And that is part of, if you look up why do people mistrust the media, this is one of the examples it's given.
Yeah, they gave themselves a huge black eye and torched their reputation. And the only thing worse than that would have been somebody else reporting it and getting caught trying to hide it. Yeah. Because what I don't think a lot of people who say the media lies all the time realize is that if you lose your reputation for telling the truth, it's impossible to get it back, right?
It takes a long time.
It takes, if you can get it back.
Yeah, I mean the individual, but I think the Times, I think they've it's been 22 years. I think their reputation's been restored.
Well, I think
they attacked it pretty viciously.
Yeah,
I mean they attacked the problem, and they were very transparent about it. And again, they have, like we talked about last week, they have a mechanism in place for complaints and for corrections and things like that. So does the paper I work at, the Toronto Star, which is very important. But as you say, as a journalist, what matters most is our reputation, right? For truth and for getting it right and for correcting our mistakes. If you don't have that, you've lost so much.
Let's give one more example from broadcasting, since we've hit print a couple times here. NBC anchor Brian Williams went on air and talked about a helicopter he was in getting hit by an RPG and having to go down in the desert. And somebody who was hit said, a military person said, I don't remember you being on that aircraft. And then the Stars and Stripes investigated it, and turns out Brian Williams made up the story. He inflated it. I would say it's BS. Right. And apparently military people had complained about his stories before. Eventually, he was taken off the main network for 6 months and put on MSNBC. For me, that punishment doesn't come near close enough.
No.
To have your main. He should have been. I remember posting on Facebook at the time, Brian Williams is dead to me, and he still is. and then even his apology was worse because he said he misremembered and conflated. Listen, if you're shot down in a helicopter,
Yeah.
you
You
know
don't
where you
misremember
don't.
that.
There's no confusion there,
No.
right? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, again, someone lied, they're caught. I don't know if every lie is caught. I think a lot of them are. But, people are trying to, like, you're going to get caught. You're going to get caught eventually. So, that's a good thing that people get caught. The bad thing is and I've never worked in a environment, a TV environment. Um, my understanding is they put so much, and you can expand on this. They put so much into their stars, their celebrities, their brands, right? You have an anchor on TV. There's a whole army of people behind that anchor who are doing the producing and getting the interviews and putting the questions. It all comes down, and so much of the success of a broadcast operation depends on their on-air personalities. So I think what happened there is, they had so much invested in Brian Williams that they didn't fire him, but they should have. They absolutely should have.
Yeah, listen, your brand is everything, right? But if your brand goes from milk to sour milk, you got to do something.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's pretty clearly lying. He paid a price. I don't think either of us think enough of a price.
Right.
We're going to talk about one more, and then we're going to go into different types of media. This one is Dominion voting machines. Fox News claimed they rigged boxes and changed votes. They did it every night on TV. And as we've talked in the past and last week, Fox has because they are not over the air broadcast, they have no ruling over them. There's no oversight to them. They were sued and they settled out of court where Fox admitted no wrongdoing, but they paid $787 million. And Tucker Carlson lost his job over that. That's the only kind of accountability that places who don't have ombudsmen, and where it becomes institutionalized that it's okay to lie. That's the only recourse there, is if you get sued to death.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. There are media outlets that aren't honest players. Fox News is one of them. As someone who works in mainstream media, I'm not a big fan of bashing other media outlets. I leave that to other people. But yeah, Fox News. Sometimes I watch the show. I don't get it at my home, but I watch it online, and it's just appalling that they, if they don't lie, then they broadcast lies and don't fact check them. And people know they're wrong. So basically following the Trump administration's lies and just broadcasting it, and laughing, and their little, And the thing I know about Fox News, what I've read, and I don't know if it's changed recently, but I remember reading about other news outlets, mainstream news outlets, saying their news operation, the stuff that's on air up until prime time, is actually very good. It's once you get into the primetime shows with the hosts that they start to go off the rails when it comes to misinformation and propaganda.
We have a few people watching. If you have any questions, please leave them. They have appeared for us in the past. We'll answer those. So let's get past news media. Proper news media, mainstream news media, is actually extremely reliable. It's human. Mistakes happen, but they're trying to get it right all the time. That's been both of our experience when we've worked in newsrooms. Everybody's trying to get it right. Let's talk about other types of media. And when I started at TSN, one of the first things I noticed, and I remember bringing mom and dad into the studio at TSN, and the set looks beautiful and the rest looks like a warehouse. And I remember saying to mom and dad, TV's a big lie. So I want to go over, I'm going to give you some experiences, and we'll talk about whether they're lies or not. Because certainly with TV as entertainment, there's a certain amount of embellishment. Back in the beginning of my career, we couldn't do interviews like this where we're both in different places and live at the same time. So we used to, especially at TSN, our host would be on the phone asking questions. We would transcribe them as best we could. Someone else would be recording somewhere else, a cameraman. They would either send us the tape or, if it was important, put on a satellite feed, and we would time the gaps for the question and our host would go on and we would count them down to reading those gaps. And then we would record them and put them together. Not exactly the way that happened. Scott, is that a lie?
I don't know if it's. I think it is a lie. I think it is. There's lies, there's white lies, right? You're not being truthful, about the situation. So it is a lie. I would say it's a lie, and I think that even though it's a smaller one, I think it's if people find these things out, it's just one more thing that erodes credibility.
All right, we're just getting started. There's also something, I worked on a crime show, and I know they've done this on other programs. They have something called Frankenbites. And that is where, if you have a show where somebody has to carry the narration, you don't have much voiceover, you need the guest to talk you through it. So you usually if you do it right, you do like 3-hour interviews with cops and lawyers, and they go minute by minute. But if you're putting them together, sometimes they don't work just right. Mm-hmm. So you may have to get the end of a sentence where they've got the meat of it, but the beginning is a messy carryover. So you take another part of a sentence where they would say, I walked into the room and I found the body laying there. Sometimes those parts of the sentence may be half an hour apart that they put together. But when it's done right, it coherently expresses what they're trying to say. It's helping them say it better, as my producer on that show said.
Right.
Is that lying?
I don't think that's a lie.
All right. I did have a story editor that worked on that show and I expressed concern about this to the producer, and the producer did not like hearing it from me. But I said, we're not being honest 100% of the time. Who would make something up that fit what we needed to say? Is that lying?
You make something up to.
They would make them say what we needed them to say, and
well, they said it. So
bits and pieces, right? It's their voice. It's pieces of their
voice.
Well,
was that the intent?
I would say sometimes we stretch that.
Yeah,
I never did. I thought that all the way.
It would be dishonest. When dishonest is a lie.
Yes.
It's like sometimes I would interview someone, right? You go to a scene, and the people aren't all that articulate, or they're still in shock, and you'd say something like, oh man, you must be outraged. I am outraged, right? So you fed them the words, but did they say it? Yes. Did they mean it? I would say yes.
I've always discouraged people planting words in people's mouth, and I know what happens. All right,
it's not good practices, but is it a lie?
No. I'm going to blow a little whistle here. There's a show I produced where we threw parties for people. I got
on that show.
What's that? Yeah,
I want to be on that show.
And when we met, when I was hired for it, I said, look, I think the best thing we can do is tell the truth. It's the best thing we can do is tell the truth. So I looked at the structure, and the structure was supposed to be celebrities running around and setting up this party. There are a lot of shows like that. I changed the structure, and then the first part is the characters, and the last part is the party. I changed the structure so that the last two parts would be the party, the first part would be the characters, and then the middle part was people running around. When we shot the parties were so good and real and honest that we made that 3 blocks. The first block was introducing the characters, and the second block was celebrities doing stuff. I made sure the party stuff was legitimately real. Every surprise we had was real. All the stuff about the people was real. Second block of the show, because people want celebrities, we had our host interview celebrities, except the celebrities didn't work in the show. It looked like they were giving ideas. Our host never actually talked to the celebrities. He was in a studio giving his lines to a TV set where we put green on it so we could green screen it. And our somebody on the show talked to the celebrities, and I wrote out for the celebrities the ideas that we had discussed in the show. So it was actually ideas that came up, but instead of seeing us, production team, in a dinky room talking about it, we had celebrities saying it. Mm-hmm. Is that lying?
I think it is. I think it's a form of deception. Is it change what they would say who was on the screen? No, but it is a form of deception. It is a type of lie. I would say it's a type of lie.
Yes.
Ultimately, does it make a difference in the how the public's never going to know? Yeah. So I mean, for a news organization, that would be that could be a real problem.
Well, this is where we get on the slippery slope.
Yeah.
Because I talked to, and I can tell you, I'm not going to go through all of them, but house flipping shows, somebody's picking 3 houses, they've already bought that house. I've known this from people who have worked on the shows. Duck Dynasty. I'm going to bring up some pictures here and I will describe them for anybody listening. Duck Dynasty was a very, very popular show where you had these people who created these duck whistles, I believe. I never watched it, but they were, real rednecky people with homespun wisdom. And I remember being at one conference and there was an executive there saying, "Is Duck Dynasty real?" "No, it's not real." And I know it's not real because I talked to the producers of that show. And this is a picture that I found. It's on the Today website. It's the same Duck Dynasty people years before. They are all in white shirts, clean shaven. They look like completely different people. So Duck Dynasty was an example of not being real. Storage unit things are planted in the storage unit. I've heard secondhand, not firsthand. Pawn shops, of course, they send things with people into the pawn shops. But I was talking to a colleague of mine whom I have a lot of affection for and has worked on a show, and she did not want me to identify her the show, which I understand. She worked on a show that was a hit. Not even going to talk the nature of the show. A hit worldwide. When she and the crew were brought onto the show, they thought it would be very docu-style. But then the network started asking for things in their notes that they had to deliver. At the same time, I was also getting notes from the same network, which had just rebranded, about things. I was doing a baby show. They wanted people to, the new mothers to complain about the mother-in-laws. So they did everything they could to make the network happy, which included things like putting people in better homes than they had actually lived in, and planting things in their mouths. And the show was very successful. Again, the producer I talked to was very proud of these shows, but also doesn't want to be coming out talking about it.
No, and there's a reason why.
Yeah. So, look, I think we both know that's lying.
Yeah.
Here's the discussion I had with this producer. The discussion I had is, the feeling that she had, which is widely shared in the industry. And I've been to conferences where we've had full sessions on this. Discovery Channel doing documentaries on megalodons, even though megalodons don't exist, the ancient giant sharks. How important is it to be truthful? A lot of feelings is, look, we're entertainment. People understand it's entertainment. When I talked to my friend, she said we were like 60-40. And I said, well, 40% is enough that it erodes trust. And she said, people know, her feeling is people know when they're watching entertainment. She felt calling things reality show is not accurate. Calling it unscripted, also not accurate. They should change the terms. My feeling is these shows should come with a warning in front of them. If same way you have things about violence, sex, and nudity, I think we should have things, statements in front of the shows that say elements of this show have been staged for entertainment purposes and lines have been fed to the characters. She disagreed because she thinks people know. What do you think?
I don't think people know at all. I think people think those reality shows, those scripted shows, they are I think they think characters are chosen because they're entertaining and they're wild cards or whatnot. Maybe they're encouraged to be disruptive, but no, I totally disagree. I think people think that when they're watching the Discovery Channel or they're watching these reality shows, that for the most part, what is happening is what is portrayed to be happening. So maybe that's just an insider's view that people think, like, professional wrestling, how can people not know this is staged, right? But I think that is, so what we need to talk about is media, right? News media. I think in a lot of people's minds, they get lumped together. They turn on the TV, right? When they switch from NBC Nightly News over to
the Kardashians
or the national, do they know that they're switching from what's supposed to be reality to something that's fabricated? I don't think they know that.
What do you think of the idea of warnings before the shows?
I think they should do that. Absolutely.
It has been done. I wrote a blog post about this years ago. I'm sure it didn't influence anybody, but I know it has been done, I believe, in Britain. And my feeling on that is, you mentioned wrestling. When people found out wrestling was staged, did they care? No, they don't care.
They didn't.
They just want to be entertained. I was over at a friend's house and his wife was talking about paranormal shows, and she saw the look on my face. She says, "I know they're fake. I just want to be entertained."
Right.
And so what's the harm?
Well, the harm is that people think the media lies, right? And we're all grouped together, right? And so what's happened is we have real life scandals like Jason Blair, right? And we also have, I think one thing that really eroded the media was almost all the media bought into the fact that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and they didn't, right? It wasn't until after the war. And there were organizations who were saying there's no proof, but they were ignored, right? That is where the news organizations have fallen down and created distrust, right? And then we have media ownership and corporate influence, which is really affecting. And they have like the guy who resigned from 60 Minutes this past week, right? Because they're in a lawsuit, and their corporate owners are trying to apparently influence the news. So it's hard to separate the news from the corporate ownership. And now, more and more, social media, with the algorithms, we are being fed information that they think we want to hear. So we've created echo chambers, we've created polarization. The political rhetoric is getting worse and worse out there. Disinformation. No one knows where the information is coming from anymore. It is so difficult. So if you have these shows where you have people arguing, well, they know it's fake. Well, where is the line? The line is so blurred now that I think there should be standards where if shows are scripted, if things are made up, the public needs to know. Because I think there's too much at stake.
All I'm asking for in my industry is transparency.
Yeah.
And to me, what's the harm? I'll tell you the harm. I got 2 words for the harm. Donald Trump. There is a producer, I should have looked up the name, I'm sorry. A producer who worked on the show, his NDA, non-disclosure agreement, has fallen by the wayside. It's expired, and wrote about the show. None of it surprised me. They tried to get a lot of executives. Only one agreed. It was Donald Trump. They went to his place. His office looked terrible. The boardroom, they had to create the boardroom. And of course, what they needed for that show to work was to have a successful businessman who's so savvy in business and wise that he can determine what's working and what isn't and evaluate talent. And I know people who have said, I would have voted for the guy on The Apprentice. But he could, those producers were so good, they convinced the world that Donald Trump, who bankrupted casinos, was a successful businessman, was wise and thoughtful. And obviously that carried over into the election. People still believe that. So that's the extreme example. But, that's the harm. That's the harm that comes from this. I have some takeaway. Do you have any summary thoughts on this? We're getting near the end, Scott.
Yeah, just that there's a lot at stake. There's so much at stake that we need to be as transparent as possible. Like I've done some TV interviews when I was a reporter, right? I hated doing those B-roll things where they had me walking down the hallway or sitting at my computer pretending to, like, that's not real. That bugged me so much. I understand why they need B-roll because it's visual, but I'm a pretty hardcore believer in that you've got to show as much as you can what reality is and be transparent. I think people understand now that B-roll stuff was staged, for lack of a better word, right?
Right.
Is there harm in that? No. Is there harm in withholding information that shows are real, or that the person asking the questions, isn't the person who's actually asking the questions? I think that that's really dangerous. And I think as society, we have let regulators, and of course, there's so many people out there that want less regulation, right? I don't like to pick on the right-wing media, but they are ones that want less regulation, and it is so damaging that there are people out there to fact check the people like Trump who are making up the fake news. And the thing that's really disturbing is that I worked with a guy named Daniel Dale who fact-checked Trump in 2016, and he did it so well that CNN hired him. So he's basically made his career out of fact-checking. And the thing that I remember saying to Daniel after the election in 2016, I said, so I guess you're not going to fact-check him anymore because it didn't make a difference. And he said, no, I'm going to continue doing it. And I'm like, well, why? Because, that's the thing that really scares me, is that even when you present people with the facts, there is so much mistrust that they either don't believe that what we're saying, that I hear that a lot, or they don't care because they're so cynical. So that's where I think it's very dangerous. And in a way, we've done it to ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to say right now, I think it's entirely possible that I have cost myself work with this podcast, but I think I'm not kidding. I think it's worth it. You can see some of the things and I'm admitting to some of the things I've done in my career. I may not have agreed with it, but I took the check. And I tried to put as much honesty in the shows as I can. And I've fought the good fight at my own expense, but still, in that one show, I knew what they were doing. I set the check. I tried to put as much as honesty in as I could, but I also understood that the broadcaster wants celebrities, and this is the way to get celebrities in.
Yeah.
Again, my thing is, I think we should have a warning. And if anybody in the broadcast industry is listening to this, I think that's something we need to discuss right now, because as we've seen, the audience doesn't know everything. I think the audience is overwhelmed by information. They don't know who to trust or what to believe. So it's easier just to distrust everything. So my summary for people, who can you believe? You can believe the mainstream media as much as you can believe anything, because they are trying hard to get it right. If their reputations are shot, they pay for it with their jobs and their reputation, their ability to work again, for the most part. If you are watching something that's entertainment, if you're watching a lifestyle show, a reality show, you can consider those entertainment. With documentaries, if you're not so sure, check it out. I find documentary producers are really rigorous and try to do things. And I should mention, we'll do a show on fact checking. For a lot of the shows I've done, I've hired fact checkers. When I worked with the Smithsonian Channel, I knew that my stuff was going to be checked by the Smithsonian Institution. So we fact checked and provided sources first. Not everybody does that. So does the media lie? Depends on what you mean by the media. In some instances, for entertainment, yes. Are things embellished for television? They kind of have to be. Is that embellishment lying? I think that's your call. I think most of the people who do things for television, the recreations you talk about, we do those things to have something to show you, to make it more interesting. They reflect what people do rather than make up. But quote Hill Street Blues, like, be careful out there.
Yeah. But you know what? I feel sorry for the people, like the producers like yourself. Like you're just following what the industry standards are. You're following what is expected of you, and people have to, and a lot of it, like it's white lies, it's shades of gray. It's not, it's not something that is going to necessarily affect directly people's lives because it is entertainment, but it's insidious. And that's my point. It's insidious, and it creates a sense overall of cynicism, and people don't know what to believe.
Yeah. And in my industry, really the question is, do you want to work or not?
Yeah.
And if you want to work, if you want to have a career, if you want to feed your family, you have to do what the production company hiring you asked you to do. And they have to do what the broadcasters ask them to do. And more, it used to be, this is another discussion, but it used to be the people at the broadcasters, a lot of us came out of journalism. A lot of us came out of that background. They don't anymore. And especially as the TV viewing audience shrinks and there's competition from phones and all of those things, people are doing what they have to do to get eyeballs. But all I'm asking for people is to draw a distinction between news, mainstream media news, and entertainment.
Yeah, and there's people working at Fox News who are hating what they're doing, but they need to pay the bills.
Yeah. So from a broadcast point of view, it comes down to the networks. This is the source of these things, and I'm sympathetic to their situation too. But I really feel as the media, we need to do better. And listen, if all we do is put the warnings on, at least we're transparent, at least people understand, and it's not going to change a thing. People will still watch.
Yeah, they will.
All right, that is it for Brothers in Media, the bros who know. Craig Colby, years in broadcasting. Scott Colby, years in print. Please check out Scott Colby's website. What's your website, Scott?
CoachColby.me.
And my website, colbyvision.net. Thank you for listening and
Thank you, everyone.
watching.